The Sandy and Toddcast is a MindgardenMedia podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions. It is the Empathecary Podcast. It's Sandy and Todd from the Sandy and Toddcast with our little, I don't know, is this like a little finger? Is this like a little branch? Is it like,
Are you giving me the finger? Is that
No. I mean, like, is this like a little branch off?
It is.
Of what?
It's sort of a branch off. It's sort of like me doing Sandy Cemeteries, which I'm working on now, by the way.
Yeah.
Just some little branches off of our main audio cast slash live cast that we do. I think that a lot of empaths go through life not really understanding that they are an empath. A lot of people throw the word empath out there just because they love animals or they love nature or they cry during movies. But there's really a big difference. And that's not to take away from people's empathy at all. Empathy is an amazing, wonderful thing. But there is a difference. And it's really important, I think, for people to know the difference, Todd, because when you learn, you kind of start your journey as an empath.
Right. That changes everything at that point. When the veil is first lifted and you go, okay, well, now the door is wide open. Now I'm seeing what's going on here. I thought this would be kind of interesting. I have the definition of empathy right here in front of me. Empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within their frame of reference. So the capacity to place yourself in another person's situation. That is empathy.
Yeah, sort of a relatability.
Exactly.
If you're sad for some reason, let's say your pet passed away. I've had a pet who passed away. My frame of experience can match yours. It's totally relatable, and I feel bad for you. Right.
That is, in a nutshell, that is what empathy is. Now, empath is someone who feels more empathy than the average person. They're usually more acute in recognizing emotions by looking at another person's face. They're also more likely to recognize emotions earlier than other people. And also, the emotions are more intense. They actually take on the emotions of the people that they're having the experience with. So in your reference, like you said, you've been through some of the same things I have. You can put yourself in my place and understand. An empath is somebody who's actually kind of dealing with it through your emotions, the other person's emotions. That's how you're kind of taking it in. So similar, but different. I think it's kind of funny because you also have two very different empaths here. You've got someone in Sandy who just to a certain degree, just loves that she's an empath, really gets into it. She gets into the whole medium thing, which just goes way beyond being an empath. And then there's me, very reluctant empath. If there's anything that I could change about my life, it'd probably be to get rid of that. And that's only come about in the last couple of years. Once I realized why I was feeling what I was feeling and going through what I was going through, I realized that I needed to try and control it. And so I've had to put up these very big walls and barriers in my life to try and police who gets in and who doesn't get in and who affects me and who doesn't affect me, while still trying to help people who need the guidance as a true, decent empath would. It's kind of been hell for me. On the last podcast, I actually talked about some of the ways you can know that you might be an empath. And I gave you 5 of them last week.
Yes.
They were: empaths are highly sensitive, usually good listeners, spiritually open, naturally giving. They absorb other people's emotions. We talked about that. You not only can sense, but you actually feel moods, good and bad.
Oh, yes.
Introverted for the most part. I mean, we all have our extrovert times, and I even call myself an extroverted introvert. I can be extroverted when I need to be, but man, I would rather just spend time by myself.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny because when we're both in radio, and I was doing mornings for quite a while. And I was very much out in the community. I still am out in the community, but because of the pandemic, just kind of in the community in a different way.
Right.
I had to learn how to do it more virtually than anything else. But I sort of looked at it as sort of playing a role. And that was how I dealt with it, because being an introvert, I still was extroverted when I had to be, or when I was really having a lot of fun with something. But you sort of have to learn how to manage it, because it is so overwhelming if you don't. And being in groups of 3 and 4 and sometimes more, hundreds of people, it can be really overwhelming for an empath. And so you do sort of kind of play a role, and that helps you to kind of separate you from the extrovert.
Yeah,
right. Everybody knows.
Everybody sees.
Yeah,
correct,
you play a
correct.
role.
Yep. This episode we're calling Dreams of Ed, and there's something very specific about this episode, because it actually does tie into the Sandy and Toddcast and an episode we did there, and the fact that you came out to visit, and we had just a wonderful time when we finally met. One of the things that we did when we planned the trip was we were going to go to Plainfield, Wisconsin, and find.
We are so crazy.
We went to find Ed Gein. Which I have to tell you, it was a great afternoon, wasn't it?
It was wonderful. We had so much fun, and it was so enlightening, but we're really crazy. Like, I was joking about it beforehand. I was like, people are like, where are you going on vacation? Florida, Cancun? No, I'm going to Plainfield, Wisconsin with my best friend and my husband so that we can go find Ed Gein and where he's buried. You know.
So, I mean, this is really a 2-level story. So I'm going to quickly go through the first level, and then I'm going to let you start the second level, and then I'll put my piece in there too. Okay.
All right, let's do it.
So the first level is Sandy plans a while back to come visit me on vacation. Within that planning period, I get sick. So we're not sure what we're going to be able to do when she comes. So she comes, turns out we can do some traveling. So, of course, we've got to go to Plainfield. It's about an hour and a half from where I live. Really not that far.
No, we were talking the whole way. We were at a ball. We stopped for lunch.
So, true story, as we're planning this, before you even get here, before you and Dave even show up, I went on and I found the location of his grave, or what I thought. What I did was, Plainfield's not a big town. There can't be a ton of cemeteries, whatever. So I went online and I found a cemetery, a graveyard, whatever you want to call it. And that's the one that I mapped when we drove out to Plainfield. When we were on our way to Plainfield, we were mapped to this particular graveyard, cemetery, whatever.
Right.
And so we got there after an hour and a half trip, after stopping for lunch, after both of us having some weird feelings on the way there. My entire trip up there, let's just throw it out there. My entire trip was filled with the energy I was feeling from the people that we were passing on the way up, the homes and the families and all that kind of stuff. And the overwhelming feeling I felt was like I was feeling everybody's hidden stuff, the stuff that they keep hidden away that nobody talks about.
Yes.
That's what kept coming up to me on the way up.
I was sort of like that myself. It was kind of weird. We went through this little like resort type of town. I don't know the area out there at all, but it was like sort of like a resorty kind of little place. They had some hotels there that was on a lake.
Yep.
And that was about the only part of the ride. Once we got done with lunch, it was about the only part of the ride that was actually peaceful for me.
Yeah.
I was feeling headaches all the way. And when I pick up energy, if it's really overpowering, I pick it up in the front of my head.
Okay.
Whereas I guess you tend to pick yours up in the back around your neck area.
Like in the lower part of my neck into my shoulders. So what it feels like is if somebody's pushing down on my head heavy into my shoulders.
Kind of like compressing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Compression would be a very good way to put it.
Yeah. And I was feeling that. The only time that I had relief was, and of course, these aren't things that you just discuss as you're driving peacefully and having fun, but we did discuss it a little bit. I was feeling some pressure. The only time I didn't was as we drove through that town. I don't know why. I don't know if it was just more relaxed there, a relaxed lifestyle in that area. But as we got closer and closer to Plainfield, it was starting to really bother me. I was starting to feel really bothered by the whole thing, which I thought was probably a little combination for me of what are we getting ourselves into, as well as probably picking up on all the energy in that area.
Okay. And I think mine was primarily picking up the energy. You know, again, what happened with Ed Gein, and you can look that up on your own. We don't need to get into all that, but that community, those people have had to fight this feeling that Ed Gein, Plainfield, you know, Ed Gein equals Plainfield equals Ed Gein, you know, and some of the most horrendous stuff that ever happened.
Most of them don't want to talk about it.
Right.
They don't want to think about it.
Right.
They don't want to call attention to their town. They just want to live their lives. And who can blame them?
Absolutely.
It's a small town of about 800, 900 people. It literally, when you drive through Plainfield, you blink, you miss it.
Yep.
So I couldn't blame them for not wanting to be well known for something like that, which kind of sets up what happens towards the end of our conversation today. Right.
So we go to this location that I was certain was the cemetery, the graveyard, whatever you want to call it. And we get there and realize it's more like a family plot. Yeah. Like it's just off the road, up this little hill incline kind of thing. And we actually missed the turn when we came. Like, there it is. Like we went by it because it's back in the trees. Like if you don't look for it, you don't see it.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know why when I planned this all out a week or two before you got here, when I found that cemetery on the map, why I went, that's the one. I have no idea. It had nothing. It didn't say like Ed Gein lies here or anything like that. That was the only one I could find. So at any rate, we realize that's not the Ed Gein site. And we do a little research, you know, online. We're driving around and we finally find the cemetery where Ed, his mother and father and brother are buried.
Which is interesting in and of itself, Todd, because I actually would have thought that the cemetery that we found at first was more what I pictured than what we actually got.
We ended up at a very nice cemetery that looks like any nice cemetery in any smaller town.
Yes.
Did some research by looking at other people's pictures online and finding the location of the stones and you know, Mama's is there, Augusta's there, Henry's is there, the father's is there as well. Ed does not have a stone there,
right?
For a number of reasons are what's told of the story. But we spent some time there. We did some investigating. And if you want to know more about that, you really should check out the Sandy And Toddcast because we really do talk about it. And we've got some great pictures as well.
Yeah,
so you can watch the video on our Facebook page.
But the main gist of that visit to Plainfield Cemetery for me was that I was picking up very, very heavily on Augusta. I was also picking up on a male energy that I, at the time, thought could have been Ed's energy. However, that energy was very calm. That wasn't energy that you would think that someone like Ed Gein, I thought at the very least, the energy of Ed Gein would be sort of topsy-turvy and all over the place.
Little crazy, right?
Little unbalanced,
yeah.
You know? And this wasn't like that at all. It was a very calm energy. And so at the time, I wasn't really sure what to make of it. I was obviously in tune with Augusta. I obviously was making a connection with Augusta. But whose energy was this? Okay, so moving on. We go out there and we do a little investigation, find some stuff again, find that on our Facebook page, the Sandy and Toddcast. Look for that episode. I don't know exactly what number it is, but it's like our first. Is it our first one in the third season or something like that? It may have been. We were just coming off of our vacation.
That's right. So I think it may have been season 3, episode 1 or 2 or something like that. Together at Last, it's called. At any rate, so we do that. We come home, blah, blah, blah. Our lives kind of go on.
Yeah.
And we've had a few conversations since then, especially with the podcast and stuff like that, about our experiences there and so forth. Now, fast forward to earlier this week, and this is where I'm going to hand it over to you.
This is really crazy. Really, really crazy. When we first got back home, it took a few days for our visit to Plainfield to really start to settle in and sink down in for me so that I could think about it and think about what happened and the things that happened and how it happened and our discussions after the fact on the way home. And I thought to myself at one point, a few weeks ago when we first got home, we really should have gone to that cemetery. But I was thinking we should have gone to that cemetery more for my love of history. Not anything necessarily paranormal, but I felt kind of regretful that we didn't go to that cemetery. I thought there were some good stories that probably could be found in that cemetery.
And again, it was for the creep factor, right?
Yeah.
It was up in the trees in the wooded kind of area. It was off to the side. It wasn't well kept. No. Any signage or gates and stuff like that had rusted. It's like from the old movies, It
really was what I pictured the Plainfield Cemetery to look like.
Right.
That's what I pictured. So fast forward to the beginning of last week, and all of a sudden I start getting my visions out of the blue of the cemetery. Not the Plainfield Cemetery, but the cemetery that we found. And these visions just keep flashing in my head. And this urgent feeling of we really should have gone there and not for history. We really should have gone there. Those words just keep pounding in my head the whole time that I'm having these visions. And they come to me randomly. And I didn't really say anything to you. I kept it quiet. And I thought on it for a day or so. And finally, the night before I talked to you about it, I tried to find the cemetery. And of course, I don't know the area that well. And I don't really know which way we went or how we went there. And so I couldn't find it. And I was almost, I guess you could say I was almost desperate to find this cemetery. I spent probably an hour that night. I asked Dave if he remembered how we got there, where it was. Of course, he couldn't remember either. So finally the next day, I said to you, hey, do you remember that cemetery that we stopped at on the way to Plainfield? And you're like, why? and I told you what was going on. And what did you say?
Well, first of all, my mind was blown because I too, within the 2 days prior to that, started having, I guess you could call them visions or dreams. I don't know which it was of that cemetery as well. Wow. And my vision, and the more, as I think about it, the vision that I kept seeing was I saw Ed's headstone, which we never saw in person. We never got to see Ed's headstone in person because it's not at the cemetery. They've taken it away for whatever reason. But I saw the headstone, and then I pictured us almost like in a movie beginning where you've got kind of like the floating camera that comes down into the city kind of thing and pulls up on a house or something. That's the vision I saw. I saw Ed's stone, and then like watching a film flying into that small cemetery just outside of town. And of course, when you said, I don't know where it is, I was able to pull it up immediately because I had researched it for no reason before, weeks ago.
Right.
And then from there, it was just very easy to find some information about the cemetery and people who are buried there and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things you said to me was something about there's something there that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, it's still hard for me to, I guess, accept that I get visions, that I know things. It's hard for me to accept that. And I've been learning how to not second guess myself. but things will just come to me, and it's funny because I'm 100% sure of them. Like, they're things that I know. And I know that there is something in that cemetery that should not be there. Now, my first thought was, Ed only admitted to 2 murders, the 2 murders that everybody knows about, the 2 women that everybody knows about. He did dig up many, many women's graves and take the bodies. But there are at least 10 missing women over the years that authorities truly believe that Ed had something to do with. But they didn't have enough evidence, and he never admitted to it. So I know that there is something there in that cemetery that should not be there, is not supposed to be there. And you even said that in your thoughts, in your visions, you were sure that there was something substantial in that cemetery, and that's why we needed to go.
Right. And then I said to you, after you said that, I said to you, why was I seeing Ed's headstone and then flying into that cemetery? I said to you, do you think it's possible that Ed's remains are actually in that cemetery?
Yeah.
You know, and again, your mind starts, I don't know if it's creating stories. I don't know if I'm actually picking up on something, but then the thought process is, well, why would, if they don't have a headstone up there because they're afraid people are going to steal it, why would they leave his body there available to be taken or whatever?
Exactly. Now, I know it sounds kind of conspiracy theorist.
Yeah,
I get that. I get that. But my first thought was that he was putting parts of his victims in a cemetery that nobody ever goes to visit. My first thought was maybe that's where some of these women are. Because if you have a cemetery that nobody ever goes to, you could put just about anything in that cemetery and no one's ever going to really know that it's there.
And you said a lot of these people had passed away late 1800s, early 1900s. There's probably no family members going to visit that location. And just from it was well maintained inside. It looked like people had like mowed the lawn and stuff, but it didn't. I mean, as far as the outside, everything was rickety and it was rusted and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't something that was maintained. Right.
So it kind of makes sense that something might be there that shouldn't be there. Whether it's Ed's victims or what if it is Ed? I mean, I know it sounds kind of conspiracy theorist, but let's look at the case just from the idea that here is a known cult figure in Ed Gein who murdered women, did all the things that he did. Are you telling me that nobody's going to go and try and dig up that body? Nobody's going to try and go deface things and do things to that man's body just laying there in the middle of a cemetery? I just find that very hard to believe.
For a city or a town to take away the headstone, there are several stories on that. One of the stories that we discussed was that people were chipping away at it and kind of ruining it. So that was one reason that it may have been taken away. Although we saw the same thing with his mother's headstone. They were chipping away at that one as well.
Why wouldn't they take hers?
Right. There was another story that it was stolen and ended up in a rock tour someplace, A rock band was touring and Ed Gein's headstone was part of the tour or something. So they took it away. Now, what they did with it, I think it's in the museum or something like that in Washoe County.
It's in the basement of the museum, I think. And that actually is the old jail, which if you watched the Steve Shippey, Cindy Kaza documentary on Discovery Plus about it, they actually went to that old jail, which is now the museum, and did some investigating in there. But it's apparently in that basement.
Okay. So again, if they're willing to take it away because they're worried about that type of stuff, who's to say that they didn't say, well, we need to keep this body in a location that nobody can get to it?
Yes.
When it was finally buried. Who knows?
And I'm not saying that it's definitely Ed's body is in the cemetery.
No.
Saying it. I don't know. I don't know if Ed put body parts of victims in the cemetery, but I will tell you, Todd, that I am without a doubt sure that there is something in that cemetery that is calling to us and wants us back there.
Well, and I also will go this far, because I don't have any answers either. But for me to see his headstone and then that cemetery, there's some sort of connection there, whether it's him there or whether he did something to some of the bodies that were there, or who knows, something that nobody's. Yeah.
And for the two of us who admittedly so are incredibly connected, for the two of us to have those same ideas and visions and thoughts out of the blue at the same time.
When you said to me, do you know about blah, 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 the cemetery? And I'm like, what the fuck? Because it literally was like the night before or the 2 nights before, sometime in that time frame.
Yeah.
I had that experience. Either it was a dream, it was a vision, or I was literally fucking traveling. I don't know which one it was, but I was back there for no reason.
It gives me the chills. It really does give me the chills. When I think about it, I'm like, this is really crazy. This is craziness on many levels. I mean, I really feel like, and I know you said that you might go back before this, but I really feel like we need to go there when I come out again, and we need to see this through. And I just don't know if it's something that's meant for both of us to be there. I don't know.
Who knows?
But it wants us to know that something's going on. I know that doesn't it sound crazy? But
no, see, we're not supposed to say that on our podcast.
I know. But you're conditioned to think that it's wild and crazy and out there, but really it's not. It's not. It's part of this life. Yes, we have some abilities that are outside of just the empath realm, but a lot of this, I think, is based in our empath abilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure and listen to the podcast anywhere where you can listen to the podcast. Tell your friends about it. Keep watching and listening to the Sandy and Toddcast. You can join the Sandy and Toddcast group as well.
Yeah, stay weirdos, friends of the Sandy and Toddcast. We are really fun, non-judgmental, safe space for thoughts, opinions, feelings, questions, anything you can think of. We have a great time.
And you get extra content there that you don't get if you're not a member. So go ahead and do that anyway. So next time, assholes and energy vampires.
Yes.
On the next Empathecary podcast. Till next time, bye-bye.
Bye.